Well, the fun thing about auctions is they always allow room for the random, right? There's always the unpredictable. It can be good, it can be bad, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's one of the reasons why people like me are kind of addicted to this industry.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. Welcome to another episode of FOMO Sapiens, the show for entrepreneurial thinkers. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis. And today we're talking to Simon Shaw, SVP and Vice Chairman of Global Fine Arts at Sotheby's, New York. You know Sotheby's, the very esteemed auction house. Over his 25-year tenure at Sotheby's, Simon has set new benchmarks for artists including Monet, Magritte, Giacometti, Miro, and Kandinsky. His 2018 sale of Modigliani's Nu Couché for $157.2 million represents the highest auction price ever achieved at Sotheby's. Wow. 9 of the top 10 auction sales for Munch were staged by Mr. Shaw, including the 2012 sale of The Scream for $119.9 million, which set a new world record for any work of art sold at auction. That is incredible. Simon began his tenure at Sotheby's in 1996 in the 19th Century Pictures Department in Paris. Welcome to FOMO Sapiens, Simon Shaw.
Hi, Patrick. Delighted to be here.
First of all, I got to say Nu Couché, which felt really good. Speaking French for all the FOMO Sapiens listening, but those numbers are incredible. We're going to have a lot of fun today. But before we have fun, I have to put you through the ringer, which is the first question I ask to everybody. And the question is this: tell me something unexpected you learned about yourself that changed everything.
Oh my gosh, are you going to do this to me? Okay,
Yeah,
I guess kind of understanding the way that my mind works. I guess like understanding that I'm like a jazz guy. Like I need to, in the sense that I need to understand stuff. I need to know the material really well. And then I need a very loose structure, but only a loose one. And I need the ability to kind of improvise within that with like energy and adrenaline. That gets the best out of me.
Me too. That's why we get along. So guys, I'll tell you the backstory on why Simon and I have been trying to make this happen for a long time, but we're both jazz people, which means we're disorganized and haven't been able to get anything on the calendar, but we finally have this happening today. The reason why is a couple years ago, I was at Brilliant Minds over in Stockholm, which is, you know, we talk about on the show here. And Simon gave a talk about selling, about the piece of work, not just selling, but the story behind the piece of artwork, The Scream by Munch, and about how it has really been an important part of global culture to the point where we actually have a Scream emoji on our phones. And so he gave this talk where he traced the history of that piece of work. And it blew my mind. And I was like, I got to be friends with this guy. So I follow him around like a weird stalker and converted him into being my friend. And then I went shortly thereafter to Oslo and saw to the Munch Museum and saw there were 3 copies of The Scream there. I spent a lot of time. They only show one at a time. You have to be like, it's a whole process. But I took part in that. And I just thought that was amazing. So I want to start there, Simon, because, you know, I think just talk about that piece of work, why it matters. And I think it's just an interesting way to frame up this whole story and talk about the auction.
I mean, even if you're a stalker, I'm still very flattered by that story, Patrick. You're the only person that's walked out of like a lecture theatre where I was speaking and got immediately on a plane to Norway.
Well, it was already kind of going to happen, but I might not have made it to the museum, so that's for sure.
Okay, well, but it was a really interesting one, right? It was about how does a painting become an emoji on your iPhone, as you say. Like, I mean, that's the only work of art that has an emoji on your iPhone. In actual fact, it has 2. It has the scream and then it has the cat screaming too. So I was interested in that talk to consider how we use works of art to think with, right? How works of art help us understand the world. And they might start as one thing. The Scream starts in Bohemian Oslo in the 1890s, and it goes through this like incredible journey through the 20th century, if you like, and becomes today like an image which is far removed from even the world of high culture. Probably many people using that emoji every day who have no idea that it's by a Norwegian artist who's called Edvard Munch. It's painted in 1892, that kind of thing. So it's a particularly rich subject. That one of all the paintings that I've ever sold, the Scream is by far the most interesting, I think.
And tell us about the auction, because it is, I mean, 119.9. You must have been like, if I can just get to 120. But talk about what happened there. Like, who bought it? When was this? Like, what was the experience like? How did you feel? All that.
Well, the fun thing about auctions is they always allow room for the random, right? There's always the unpredictable. It can be good, it can be bad, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen. It's one of the reasons why people like me are kind of addicted to this industry. When we offer a work of art, any piece for auction, we come up with an estimate. So we let people know, we think this is worth in this range, right? We think, and we said in the case of the Scream, we think it's worth between 80 and $100 million. The world record for Munch was $38 million at that point. So, is this worth 60? Is it worth 80? Is it worth 100? It's very difficult to predict. Interestingly enough, of the many firsts that came about during that sale, one was that it was the first painting that the London bookmaker trade. They opened a book on it, so you could place bets on how much the picture was actually going to sell for. And
what really if you're the bidder? Isn't that, can you actually, if you're the bidder, can you do that?
That would be cheating, I guess. But they had a book on it, and actually the shortest odds you could get were between 115 and 120 million dollars. So we reckon there's somebody working in the London bookie trade who knows Norwegian expressionist art far better than any of us. But it was unexpected. We said 80. It was the most electric, exciting moment probably of my career. 12 minutes of bidding, opens at $48 million, and then just rises and rises and rises. At that time, the world record for any work of art was $105 million. I hoped that we would beat that, but really didn't know. I mean, this was also not a huge work. Not even an oil on canvas. The first time ever that the most expensive work of art ever sold had been a work on paper, or rather on board. It's pastel on board. So many firsts, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety that Munch would have appreciated, energy, electricity, fireworks in the room, and gosh, do we need a drink afterwards?
Yeah, did you like contain yourself, or were you like beaming like a madman?
Both. I was definitely beaming like a madman.
That's
yes.
Amazing.
There's a funny story actually that the owner of the picture, like immediately after this,
Leon Black, right?
He was there. No, was the seller of the painting, Petter Olsen. And there's a photograph of me shaking hands with Petter and saying, $119 million. Just actually, I tell you, so the next day, I said to him, Petter, are you happy? $190 million? And he was like, yeah, but I have to tell you, I went to Cafe Bulu after the auction, and then the next table was Neil Young. Neil Young, can you forget? And I went and introduced myself because he was at Berkeley in the 70s. He's like, forget the painting. I got to have dinner with Neil Young. And that put me in my place, I can tell you.
First, so I love that story. And anybody who doesn't know Munch, the Scream's great, but the one thing you learn when you go to the museum, if you're ever in Oslo, like, make sure you do it, is his work's amazing. Like, everything he did, he's super underappreciated in my mind, at least in the US. So thank you, Simon, for the gift of Edvard. Now, I want to talk about the process of the auction, because we were just riffing on this, you and me, over the years when we hang out. And like, when I think of an auctioneer, like, granted, you're doing fine art, but I think of like a guy auctioning off like cattle at like some like rodeo in like, American South or something. It is not that, obviously. However, it is interesting because this is not easy. There is like this is an art form in a sense that hasn't really changed since the Greek and Roman times. Sotheby's was founded in 1744, still doing auctions. Like that art form has continued. So talk about like, how do you actually do this? And how do you, because it's FOMO generation, right? Like, it is. So like, unpack that for us.
I seem to remember your first question to me was, wow, you're an auctioneer. Does that mean you can say numbers really fast? Like 22, 22, 22, 22, 22. That's cows. That's not really what I do.
You must have been like, this guy sucks.
But the principle is the same. And I think that Yeah, as you say, like not only is Sotheby's a company that's been going for nearly 300 years now. There are others, but I struggle to think of other companies that have been going for 300 years that do exactly the same thing in the same way, more or less, as they did 300 years ago. Nokia, for example, 1850, Nokia was making rubber boots. Today they make technology. Sotheby's is still an auctioneer. And the reason is, you mentioned ancient Greece and Rome there. The reason is that it is a uniquely exquisite mechanism for assigning a value to a unique asset, whatever that asset might be. And the way that it works is impossible to improve upon. The psychological pressure that it creates within the auction room makes it very difficult for all but the most hardened folks. And look, I've been an auctioneer for many years. I'm subject to exactly the same pressures if I go and bid in an auction.
Of course.
If you're looking at a painting like The Scream, to walk up to it and say, I love this picture, I can see it hanging on my wall, it's going to make me happy when I look at it every day. I want it if it sells for 85. But if it sells for 86, I'm going to walk out of the room happy as Larry, very happy for somebody else to take it home and hang it on their wall. Now, that's possible, but it's a very, very difficult thing to do. What most of us do is when we're in the room and we bid our 65, 70, and there's like several people bidding against a 75, someone else says 80, 85 there. Wow, there's 5 people. This is what happened with The Scream. There's 5 people that want this picture. That actually validates my love for the object. And as a result, I want it more. And the next bid, okay, I've reached my limit of 85. The next bid is not 150. The next bid is it's 90. And that's 90 is only a tiny, tiny bit more than 85. So I'm just going to bid that one little bit more. And then the other guy who's come with a limit of 90 is in the same position, and on we go. So it creates this unique kind of atmosphere at its best of desire. And sometimes you can end up with a result which is far beyond what anybody would have predicted. Because in any other kind of transaction, right, you've got a buyer and a seller. The seller wants to sell for the highest possible price, and the buyer wants to buy for the lowest possible price.
Yeah.
An auction is the exception to that rule. Typically, the person who walks away from that auction having paid $120 million for The Scream trades that you get anywhere in the art world, right? And auctions are this weird mixture of magic and mystery and enigma and transparency. So you know that on this particular date, this painting changed hands for $10 million, right?
Yeah.
And there was somebody on the telephone, there was an auctioneer with a little hammer and the thing sold. You know the price, the trade happened. You don't know who the seller was typically. You don't know who the buyer was. You don't know who the underbidders were. You don't know all of the choreography and mystery behind that. And there's a very good reason for that, because we don't want to tell you, because that's what we do. You know, that is the end point very often. In the case of The Scream, maybe it was 12 minutes of bidding. Sometimes it can be 1 or 2 minutes of bidding only. You know, that public face of the transaction is a tiny moment, but it can represent, in the case of The Scream, I worked on that for 10 years for those 12 minutes. That was 10 years work for me.
Wow.
You're never going to know that. But, you know, that's the alchemy of auctions, and it's hard to beat.
FOMO. FOMO.
Do you think it matters? I mean, this is so random, but I just came to mind. Like, if you were to do an auction, the Scream auction, in a room in a barn, or in a fancy room in New York City with champagne and chandeliers and model-y type women and all the things, do you think the prices would be different?
It all depends on what you're selling.
You're spelling The Scream.
The Scream is, you know, arguably even today above the Mona Lisa, the most famous image on the planet. You went to see 3 in Oslo, where they're in museums and never going to be sold. There's one more, and one only. So you get one, and that the family had owned this picture for 80 years. So you get one shot at buying that. I could have sold it, in out of a car trunk in New Jersey, sure.
Okay.
And it would.
So it's not stagecraft. It's not stagecraft. It's the quality of the piece for that kind of thing.
Yes, but an auctioneer, a good auctioneer, makes a huge difference. as an auctioneer, you have this incredible like control sense of power over this room, and it's quite exquisite, really, because you need to exert enough psychological pressure to make people step up and bid one more and one more and one more. But you need to create a buying atmosphere. You can't like sell, you can't push things down people's throats. So the best auctioneers actually come across as very relaxed. They make jokes, they release the tension, they ratchet up the tension, they control a rhythm, a bit like the conductor of an orchestra, I suppose. So a good auctioneer can make a significant impact on the atmosphere in the room, the energy, and ultimately the financial result.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, the other two things that are happening are, number one, the auctioneer is an expert, right? It's not some jabroni from down the corner who's like, it's like, this is a person who you trust, you should trust. If it's Sotheby's, it's not a random, auctions.com, right? So there's a credibility element. And the second is, I would argue, British accent. It's like, it's like, pardon me, do you have any Grey Poupon? I just want to pay more when I hear the British accent.
I could sell you anything. I've sold you all sorts of junk,
Yeah,
just
exactly.
purely based on my accent.
A trip to Oslo.
Send me the bill. But there's a tradition in New York, in particular, of British and European auctioneers, for that matter. In 1964, the leading auction house in New York, called Park Burnett, was bought by Sotheby's, and that was the first moment where a global auction house was created. The two centers of the art market, New York and London, had the same principal auctioneer. And our roots are back in 18th century London. 18th century London is really the roots of today's culture, to the commercial world that we live in. So we're very much a product of that, and we trade on that, obviously, that fantastic heritage that we have over 3 centuries.
Let's talk about, so the Scream is like an incredible example, but the thing is, I think people don't realize, like, you guys auction everything. And so in a sense, like, Sotheby's and some of its peers, they are tastemakers, because you have to be able to read the trend of what people want to buy. There is an element like, some things will sell no matter what, but other things, you have to create like a moment in the way that fashion houses create moments around trends. And then you have to put together a collection and then tell the story around that collection. And so this could be cars, it could be wine, it could be memorabilia. Like, there's a bunch of different. Tell us about the range of things that are sold at a place like Sotheby's.
That's right in one sense, except we don't sell anything. We sell very specific things.
Okay.
We sell the most desirable, special things that you could ever, as a human being, hope to own. Mm-hmm. Now, that might be, earlier this week, we sold the skeleton of a Stegosaurus for $44 million. That's the highest price ever achieved for a dinosaur skeleton. We might be selling cars, vintage cars, wonderfully strong market right now. We might be selling sneakers. We're the official partner of the NBA in selling NBA merch. We sell game-worn sneakers by Michael Jordan for millions of dollars. We also sell wine and jewelry and watches, but also Caravaggio, if we can find them, and Picasso and Edvard Munch. What we sell, and many more besides that, many more categories besides that these days, what we sell are the most important items of cultural property. So I like to think in my more high-minded moments, that's what I do. I am a steward of cultural property. Valuable objects need to change hands safely. They need somebody to look after them. They need somebody to tell their stories and represent them to the world in the way that I did with the Scream when you heard me. But the crucial distinction, you touched upon this in your question, is that taste change. What the culture values is not the same at one moment as it might be to the next. And we are very much leaders. We're market makers within that. So our parents, Patrick, would have bought, if they had a wallet deep enough to do so, fantastic French furniture perhaps, or English furniture. Today, nobody wants 19th century furniture unless it's really the museum quality, because the homes we live in simply, that doesn't reflect the lives that we lead. Conversely, we now do hip hop sales at Sotheby's because the demographic is such that those of us who grew up in the 1980s, Public Enemy say a lot more to us. Biggie says a lot more to me than Andy Warhol, because that's my generation when I came of age. So we sold Biggie's crown in the famous self-portrait of the King of New York for $500,000. You know, that's a $4.99 crown from a dollar store. But it's a work which, in the hands of a great auctioneer, becomes a cultural relic. That's something that's genuinely important to the culture. So we're always trying to get ahead of these trends, explore new types of sale, new types of property that reflect where the culture is at any given moment.
I just, as you're talking, I'm thinking about NFTs because remember NFTs, Simon? I do. And there was a time when everybody thought that NFTs were going to be, you know, the future of the art world, and that and people were auctioning off NFTs for millions of dollars. Now that has gone away. There are still some pieces that have value for sure, not to lump it all in, but in general, that was like a kind of a flash in the pan kind of moment. I'm curious, like, when you think about something like that, like what happened there in your mind? Like why does something go so quickly from being so, you know, because you don't usually, I don't know, you don't see that as often in this world, right? Where something for $3 million last year is like nothing, right? I mean, that's kind of weird.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think in 2019, Patrick, only real specialists, you know, knew what an NFT was, and yet by, you know, the middle of 2020, everybody, it felt like the Western world knew what an NFT was. I would dispute the fact that everybody felt they were going to be the future of the art market. That wasn't the case, but they were.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that,
and will remain an interesting new format for the creation of works of art, not simply works of art. Actually, I thought during COVID, when we sold a lot of NFTs, one of the most interesting was actually 500 lines of code that Tim Berners-Lee wrote setting up the World Wide Web. Okay,
yeah,
now that's cool. That's a genuinely digital artifact. Sure, you could print that out and frame it and put it on your wall, but what would be the point of that? That we live in a digital world, that is a foundational digital document, and therefore an NFT, which locks that document up in perpetuity and preserves its provenance and its authenticity for infinity, that is a really meaningful way of using an NFT, for example. Whenever there is a new vehicle, it's the same with video art, for example. It takes a while for artists to adopt that in a way that produces meaningful work. NFTs, what we saw during COVID, of course, was more a reflection of the fact that we were all sitting in front of
we lost our heads a little bit. We were like, a little crazy.
And it was tulip mania. We were in front of our screens all day long. We were not spending money, number one, on other things, on travel, on entertainment, all sorts of other stuff. So we weren't spending money on that stuff. And we were also a bit ADD and kind of needing some kind of new things to grasp our attention. So, and the other thing is, of course, that it is very connected to crypto. And, you know, with crypto reaching the levels that it had at that point, NFTs offered a useful vehicle for those to be able to buy and trade objects using cryptocurrency.
You make it sound completely rational, and which I appreciate. Now, I have a couple more questions before we get to the lightning round. And the first one is, it's more of a comment, but I'd love you to just, you know, sort of opine. I think one thing that I learned, so Simon was kind enough to invite me over to Sotheby's, which, by the way, it's public, so you can go too, and show me around a bit. This Emily Fisher Landau auction, which was the big blockbuster auction of 2023, and it was really something. And like what I realized is Sotheby's is like the best museum in New York City, and it changes all the time. And you can see incredible art, and you can just walk in off the street. It's free to visit, and it reminded me that, like some other industry, like I think of the music industry or the publishing industry, it's where art meets commerce, and there is something beyond. There is like a positive externality that is about the work and the art and the creation that goes beyond just the money. And I want to bring that up because I think it's a real credit to your field. But yeah, like talk a little bit about this cultural stewardship element, because it's important.
I'm really glad that you've mentioned that, because I think you are hardly unusual in walking in through the door and Sotheby's and hopefully getting a real kick out of an incredible once-in-a-lifetime exhibition of works. Many of them hadn't been seen in public 50 years, may not be seen in public for another 50 years, and you were right there and caught that. And you're not unusual in realizing when you come through the door that actually that is open to anybody. You've never done it before, and it's a great experience. And as you pointed out, it's always different. You know, one week you might come and we're selling vintage cars, and another week it might be old master paintings. Another week it might be Chinese works of art. You know, or 20th century design. It's always different, and it's always the best. It's never anything short of fascinating when you walk into Sotheby's. And we welcome everybody to come look and enjoy these shows because, yes, it's commerce. You know, some people are going to come into that exhibition and they're going to fall in love with a Picasso, and they're going to walk out and come back the next week when the auction happens, and they're going to bid on it and they're going to take it home. Great. A lot of the people that come see our shows are not that audience. They're an audience who are interested in Picasso, and they recognize the kind of unique offering that Sotheby's represents. You know, it's an always changing, widely diverse world. There is no cultural institution in the world, even though the Metropolitan Museum or the British Museum, for example, give you like an incredible view of culture from early history onwards from all over the world. There is nowhere that sells Caravaggio, Virgil Abloh, Leonardo da Vinci, Ferrari, Edvard Munch, Picasso, all of these things under one roof. And that's the amazing thing about the place. I like to think about it as like a hive of stories, if you like. What we're literally built out of the stories of the world's most interesting objects. This week it was this fantastic dinosaur Apex, but next week it'll be something different, and we get to tell those stories, and that's what excites me. One of the things that excites me most about what I do.
Yeah, you just did a little FOMO generation right there with that. That was very inspiring at the end. And it leads me to my final question before the lightning round, which is this. Your job is the kind of job that, like, it's the kind that, like, cool characters in movies have. Like, it's like, it is something that is so amazing sounding from the outside. I know, of course, it's a job like anything else, and some days you probably, it's annoying. But for those of us who say, wow, like, I want to be like Simon, for somebody who's listening and says, I'd love to do what you do someday, like, what is the path? How does one get there?
It's probably a bit different today than when I started. Where it starts is a deep passion and commitment to the cultural property. I think whatever it is, most of us come from a background like me, where we might have ended up in academia, researching, teaching, telling stories, but actually wanted more than that. And, being able to have that academic side to your job. I learn new things every day. I see like hundreds, if not thousands of paintings every week. Some of them I even remember, and I'm always learning like new things. So learning that, coupled with a brutally competitive commercial arena that we operate in, right? It's a lot about the negotiation and the brinksmanship and the sales ability of the sales force. It's a lot of other sort of really exciting stuff, which is blended with the academic. That is what makes it unique. So I think you have to come from a place of passion to love the stuff. You don't love the stuff, you won't cope with the kind of stresses and strains of the business side of it. And I think the ways in these days are various. I mean, demonstrating that kind of commitment. Look, go see, talk to people, go to galleries, go to auction houses, meet people, argue with them. The best way of understanding and appreciating works of art of any kind is to get into a discussion with somebody about them. Do that. Go and intern. Try galleries, try museums, try auction houses. They're very, very different kind of receptacles for considering art. Yeah, I think that's vague advice, but it's probably the best that I can give. Like most routes, people have different routes, and people find their way to us in all sorts of ways these days.
I think that's good advice. I mean, these are places where you can go apply after college. You can intern their ways in, and if you keep your head down and work hard, you may be, doing what Simon does.
FOMO.
Simon, you ready for the lightning round?
Well, not really, but if you insist.
I think you are. Number one, what's a favorite quote?
Fear is not sowing because of the birds.
What is that from?
I think it's Confucius, isn't it? It's like if you don't, you can always like find reasons not to sow the seed because a bird might come along and eat it. But you don't get anywhere unless you take risks.
I like that. I never heard it before. Number two, name one book or podcast that every FOMO Sapiens should know about.
Oh my gosh, one book or podcast. I really like The Rest is Politics, which is a British podcast
I
with
am
Rory
obsessed.
Stewart and
Yes, and Alistair Campbell. Yeah, I listen to it. I listen to it to understand American politics because it's very good.
Well, right. So Caddy Kay and Anthony Scaramucci, to my great surprise, are doing a US version.
I like
which
the
is
Caddy
actually really
K.
good.
I'm not so on the
he's great.
Scaramucci boat. But yeah, that show is great. I love it. I want to be friends with Rory and Alistair. If you're listening, guys, be my friend. Okay. Number three, what's one piece of advice you give to your younger self?
Gosh. I think a lot of life comes down to, or success in life, should we say, comes down to self-confidence. You know, being able to put yourself out there, to tell yourself, this is going to work out, you know, I can do this. And like exude that self-confidence through every pore is often half the battle. We often put ourselves down, you know, we find ways to get out of things. I do every day. But I think when just having an overweening sense of confidence that you're going to make it happen is often half the battle.
Yeah, mindset over skill set. I mean, not that you can't have, you need the skill set, but like the mindset piece is just. Final question is this. What's your most important memory?
My most important memory? Gosh. I mean, there are professional memories, but you're talking about like in terms
anything
of
you want.
my life.
There are no rules, my friend.
I think I'm a creative at heart. I'm a frustrated creative who, like many of us, went into like a creative adjacent career, if you like, rather than making money by my own creativity per se. I was a musician when I left school. I was a wonderfully unsuccessful musician, and so I sort of diverted from that course. But I think the feeling of actually making something out of nothing that now exists in the world is a feeling that I really experienced in my late teens, probably early 20s for the first time. And I've never quite got back to that ecstasy. Maybe one day.
What did you play?
I play piano and guitars and keyboards and things. And I write music all the time. That's what I do.
I have a piano over. You come over the house. We'll play some duet.
You're a good pianist.
Boom.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think the point is actually it's different when it's paying your rent, when it's your career.
Yeah.
Like for me, music, creativity outside of any kind of commercial thing, I play purely for fun by myself with other people. There's no pressure, and you know I'm able to really enjoy it and actually use it as a an escape from the sort of public commercial world.
All right. If you want to find out more about Sotheby's and Simon, you can find Sotheby's.com online. Of course, you can head over to @Sotheby's, where, by the way, there's tons of content that you can enjoy. You can find
videos, stories. Yeah. There's always, it changes every day.
It's a beautiful place to go. If you want to find out more about Simon, you can check out his funky Instagram at Simon M. Shaw. Simon Shaw, SVP, Vice Chairman, Global Fine Arts at Sotheby's. Thank you so much for being there.
It's my pleasure, Patrick. It's been great fun to talk to you as ever.
FOMO.
If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Patrick J. McGinnis, on Twitter at PJ McGinnis, and on the web at FOMOSapiens.com or PatrickMcGinnis.com, where you can get all kinds of free resources to live a more decisive and entrepreneurial life. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com.